Hello. I was saying you put a mic in my hand and you just don't know what's going to happen. I will not be singing. Just really quickly, it occurs to me, or it occurred to me listening to Marty's keynote speech this morning and doing the case study, just how much of what we all do is connected, and some of the importance of what we do, or why we do it, or how we do it. They're all linkages. And one of the things that sort of came to mind in thinking about when Marguerite was talking was just about the importance of, she was talking about the banking sector, and just to give you a sense of like how we have to adapt to things and have to adjust to things. Our chief information security officer came out about 18 months ago and said that, publicly said that as a bank, we get hit with some sort of hacking attack 7 times every second. So it is tough. And then the other one is that I was talking to my 8-year-old daughter a couple days ago, and she said, "Oh, Dad, did you learn anything interesting? Do anything interesting at work today?" And I said, really proud. I said, "Actually, today I had some members of my team teaching coding." So, I learned a bit of coding and sort of how to process huge volumes of data just with lines of code. She said, what language did you learn? And I said, Python. And she goes, "Didn't you learn that in primary school?" So what I'll do is, just very quickly, I'll start really broad. And then I will narrow down pretty quickly, but I've got some notes because there's a lot in my head. Just make sure I sort of follow the script. But really in the next 20-25 minutes, what I'll do is I'll just share some perspectives on how I see work changing. So in general, a very broad perspective, what it means for the financial services industry, and what it means for Deutsche Bank specifically. And then what are some of the things that we're doing about it in order to address that. Before we get into specifics, just a point on how difficult it is to predict or even anticipate exactly what's going to happen in the future. And one of the things I love about this quote is that it just reminds me that I honestly have no idea, and I do not have the answers. But neither does the CEO, neither do the heads of business divisions or functions, neither do all of the consultancies that are out there selling future of work services. Nobody knows the answer. So if any of us needed any more, any reminder of that, here are a few things which I love, and it goes on a bit. So one thing I love about that is it just keeps going, and you can find endless quotes like that. And it's just a reminder, which I find really, really nice. So the question then is, if we don't know what will happen, what do we know? So one thing we do know, and it's evidenced here, is that we've been through enormous and unprecedented technology change over the last 60 or 70 years, and in particular in the last kind of 10 to 20 years. So if you think about the iPhone, the first iPhone was released in 2007. That's the first time anyone had a smartphone. We also know that cycles of change are compressing, and they'll continue to compress. So when I started my career in consulting about 20 or so years ago, we had about 5 years. So there were 5-year cycles of change where we would start a project, we would have 9 to 12, sometimes 18 months to complete the project. We finished the project, and then we could leave it alone for like 3.5 years, maybe 5 years. Now we've got 12 to 18 months maximum. As soon as we're finished, we have to start again. So it's that old, painting the fourth bridge. Is that the fourth bridge? We also know that we're going to continue to produce exponentially more data every year. So the amount of data, just to give you a sense of that, the amount of data that exists in the digital universe is expected to reach 44 zettabytes by 2020. And what that means is there will be 40 times more data than there are stars in the observable universe. The question is, what the hell do we do about it, right? And we know that as a result of all of this, the organizational constructs and ways of working that most senior executives in corporates grew up with are either obsolete or becoming obsolete. And we also know that the people entering the workforce today will exist and enter the organization in a they'll inherit organizations that are completely different from what they walk into. So, I've only got 2 hands. I gotta turn my page. And then I think that the other important point is that we know that the speed at which things are happening on the back of artificial intelligence will start to accelerate this even more. Okay, so with that, we know that we're going to be operating in a very different environment in the digital world. So in the next 5 years, by some estimates, we'll see between 80 and 90% of the global population will have smartphones, which is up from about 43% today. And what that means is, it will affect global commerce, it will affect how we're doing business, it will affect how what consumers buy, how they buy things, it will affect the environment. Because actually the production of a smartphone is incredibly, has a big effect on the environment and climate change, based on the rare earth minerals, for example. In our daily lives, AI and machine learning will, and this is actually linked to professional lives as well, but AI and machine learning will do work historically done by humans and will increasingly become the norm. What this means is that the capabilities that we need, at work in particular, are fundamentally changing. More and more of us will have to work alongside what they call, if you've heard, digital agents. So, we call them bots or robots, but digital agents who, that are basically there answering questions when you dial a help desk. If you need technology help, it's all digital agents, or a lot of them. So what we've got is we've got a workforce that is going to not only be answering questions, or not answering the questions that come in, but people who are part of that function who need to know how to work alongside the digital agents to make sure it's working effectively. So the question is, what does this mean for the financial services industry broadly, and Deutsche Bank specifically? And some of the points here are that there will be, from my perspective and the perspective that we're working at, is that all functions and all divisions in banking are going to be affected. And what we absolutely know is that every single job, every single one, is going to be affected by all of this change. And these include things that are obvious and talked about. So for those of you who know the financial services industry or some of these terms, you've got algorithmic trading, which is fairly well known, distributed ledger technology, creation and use of cryptocurrencies, technology requirements driven by MiFID II. So for those of you who aren't aware of what MiFID II is, MiFID II came into force earlier this year, and what it said was that every trade that a financial institution does has to be able to be reported on within 3 seconds of the trade happening. There's no way to do anything with that except overlay a technology solution. You've also got the less talked about, although perhaps I would say equally obvious once you sort of think about them. So how technology is being used to support compliance, anti-financial crime, know your client. So what we're trying to do as an industry is move past post-event identification to pre-event detection. So if you think about that, what that means is you use technology to identify a pattern of behaviors that indicates when there will be some sort of wrongdoing or wrongdoing that might occur, breaking a law or something like that. And for those of you who know Deutsche Bank, that's a big deal because we paid a lot of fines in the last 5 years or so. So if you can do that and you identify that there's a pattern of behavior that is you anticipate will lead to a crime, what do you do with it? Because, has anybody seen Minority Report? Read Philip K. Dick. You can't really arrest somebody or do something, there's no discipline because someone did a bunch of things that may lead to a crime. So you can do nudges. You can identify a policy, for example, that automatically is triggered and sent to a person to say, just a reminder about our insider trading policies. Start looking at your shoulder. But what that does is it gives you the nudge. But these are the kinds of things that the industry is looking at and thinking about. Another one, a move towards robo-advisors. So digital asset managers. So for those of you who are aware of, like Goldman Sachs has a product called Marcus, which is trying to democratize investment. And Marcus is, it's all driven on AI. So it's algorithms, and you figure out what your portfolio is going to be based on a survey. And there are very few humans that are touching that. And then I mentioned the Chief Information Security Officer, the CISO at our bank, and what they have to deal with in terms of hackers. And then there's the not talked about yet. And this is the stuff that then necessitates a shift in business model and vision. So as technologies and demographics change, it paved the way for a new breed of competitors in the industry. So who we're competing against today are not financial services institutions. You've got Monzo, you've got Revolut, you've got all of the big technology companies are thinking about financial services, right? Even supermarkets, right? Tesco offered, it's their banking, Sainsbury's as well. So it's creating a completely different competitive landscape. So in addition to fundamentally changing how we work, it's also going to change the type of people that we work with. So we're thinking about the skills and the capabilities that we need in order to compete. Okay. So with this, you just look at some of these things, and you've got a big shift, for example, in the types of skills we're hiring for. So technologists, people who have foundation in neural networks and maths, engineers. Whereas, your image of the sort of, the old gentleman banker, it's starting to completely go away. When you look at the half-life of technical skills, which is rapidly decreasing, 2 years. So what does that mean for what we have to do and how we respond to it? So what we're doing is we're thinking about how we organize for knowledge sharing and continuous learning, not just for delivery. Because if we organize around that, then it'll be obsolete before we even start. So when I started working in this field, the learning organization was kind of aspirational. Where we are now is an absolute necessity. So getting a bit more specific. So given all of that context, the bank had to respond. And I've been working at Deutsche Bank for 4 years. I was in management consulting before that. And I started at the bank as the head of organization design. And I joined the bank. I built a tiny center of expertise, 6 people. And I now run the global consulting function, as I said. And I'll get to sort of some of the things that we found and some of the things that we've been doing in a few minutes. But just I'll give you the context at Deutsche Bank. For those of you, some of you will be aware, some not. So you know that we've had a challenging few years, probably. In the late 1980s and the early 1990s, Deutsche Bank went away from its traditional business, which was for 120 years, it was serving the German Mittelstand, which is the sort of mid-cap companies in Germany. It was the bankers to German corporates. And it moved away from that into investment banking. And there was a rapid shift towards investment banking because at the time, that's where all the money was. That was the sexy stuff, that was the exciting stuff, that was how the bank was going to become a really true global player. But what happened there was that the lead up to the financial crisis, because it was really in some ways slightly unchecked, you had a bank that looked relatively healthy, and when the financial crisis came, Deutsche Bank was okay. It appeared to be okay. And all of the US banks had to be bailed out, and they had to really fix all the mess that existed in their organizations, whereas Deutsche Bank didn't. It didn't have to because, it looked okay. And it was only a few years later that the cracks started to show, and all of the US banks had already gone through the painful restructurings that they needed to go through. They'd cleaned up their messes, they'd gotten their operations in order, and they were starting to go on the upswing, and that's when you start to see the dip in share price at the bank. So in July of this year, we announced a new a change in strategy, a change in direction, moving away from investment banking, particularly equities, which it's in structural decline anyway, if you look at what's going on in the industry, much back towards the corporate banking environment, the German Mittelstand, the private bank, the retail bank, wealth management, asset management, sort of the where you would see the strength of a bank like Deutsche Bank. But what that also meant was that we had to increase our customer orientation, customer centricity, and also think about employee experience. So again, a very different kind of environment. And what we then had to do was increase the skills and capabilities of our people with a particular focus on becoming more adaptable and responsive to change in the face of rapid change. And then all of that is doing that while continuing to meet our regulatory requirements. So a slightly challenging environment. So I assume most of you are familiar with T-shaped leadership. When we looked at it, is that the classic T-shaped leadership model really wasn't enough. Building depth and discipline in discipline in the system before developing those boundary crossing competencies, it really wasn't enough. So what we thought about was, how do we build, what I sort of think about more of a kind of capital I-shaped leadership model, which is building those foundational skills and experiences so that at the junior end of the spectrum, so that they have experiences and skills that can be continually adapted and upgraded. Because otherwise, you'll basically be creating churn and people will be spit out of the organization and you'll have to rehire. The cost to the organization is, just in terms of pure like euros, pounds, dollars, is very high, but also in terms of knowledge that you lose. The institutional knowledge is really, really important here. So at that same time, we were fundamentally rethinking and changing how we work at the senior levels in the bank. So we have a bunch of senior people, managing directors, and in some cases directors. Let's just take the managing director population at Deutsche Bank. We've got, I think, about, 1,900 managing directors across it. It's a 90,000 person organization. And within that managing director population, you have people who have been working for 20 or 25 years in a system with a defined set of rules. They climb up the pole, they get to be the boss. It is a hierarchical organization. It is a hierarchical industry. And they get the corner office, they get an assistant, they get to tell people what to do. And now we're telling them, guess what? That's got to change. Not that many people like that. So you have to go from, you got, 150 years of history. That group of people, and we're now saying that what will make you and the bank successful in the future is how well you use your network. How well you operate by influence, as opposed to how well you operate by control. Most of the people, I'd say most, a high percentage of the people that I work with are used to operating only by control. They say, I can't manage what I don't control. I call BS on that one, by the way. We're also saying that a deliberate and well-executed plan that takes 12 months to deliver, it's no longer acceptable. You have to try, you have to iterate as you go. Now, in an environment and an organization where perfection was what everybody aimed for, and if you walk into a meeting with senior executives and you haven't thought of everything and everything's not perfect, you basically get shouted out of the room. That's a fundamental cultural change. So the point on perfect information and speedy decision-making, managing certainty, managing polarities, we have imperfection, which has to become the norm as opposed to perfection. And then the other one, which I find really interesting, and there was a point about reverse mentoring earlier, you now need to listen to the recent university graduate who can take your 400,000 lines of unstructured code, unstructured data, and analyze it with a few lines of code. And reverse mentoring in its idea, so we do it at the bank, but I watched some of it happen, and we had some junior people go in and meet with senior people, and they honestly didn't know what to do. The senior person was like, I feel like I'm talking to my child, and what is it that you can tell me? And we had to get them into a mindset and a change of thinking to allow them to become open to actually receiving information from somebody who just by their perception, had absolutely nothing to offer. Now that's a pretty damning statement, and that is not across the board, but that's the kind of extreme, at the extreme end of it. So when we looked at it, we felt that we could use organization design and organization design concepts to get us where we needed to go. And if you look at the left-hand side over here, we started with, the way that I think about organization design and the way that I talked about it with the bank was, organization design is a predictable, repeatable process. Now, I say process, it's not linear, it's iterative. And maybe the context is different, maybe the business is different, maybe the problem you're trying to solve is different, but actually the steps that you go through are the same. So if you're able to do that, then you can create kind of a structured approach to it. But on the left-hand side, that's kind of where we started, which was very, it feels very linear. And where we are now is on the right-hand side, which is overlaying agile concepts on top of organization design. And it's blurred out here, but what you have is at the left-hand side up here, you have spending time in the problem space. So what is the problem that you're trying to solve? And why are you trying to solve it? And we're very deliberately forcing people to spend more time in the problem space. And then we're allowing them to move into the solution space, which is in the middle. And the solution space is obviously where you do your high-level design, your detailed design. And then the last box is what I'm calling the sustainability space. Because one of my observations in coming into the bank, and this is, I've worked in, I think, 40 or 50 companies in this kind of work over the last 20 years or so. One of my observations was that we get into these cycles where we do the high-level design, we do the detailed design, we implement it, we stand up the organization, and then we're done. And we walk away and we go do something else. And 18 months later, someone comes to you and says, do you know what? It's not working. So what do? Let's rip it up and start over. So the sustainability space is how do you get into cycles of continuous improvement so you can then loop it and go back and do the same thing over when you identify the things that aren't working perfectly. Because the other thing I absolutely know is that no matter what you design, it will not work 100% the way you expect it to work. So what do you do when you identify those things? And that's where the sustainability space comes in. The other thing is, and again, thinking about the connections, thinking about the organization as a dynamic system. And the organization as a dynamic system, it has the hard inputs and it has the softer inputs and outputs. And if you can't bring those two things together, then your organization will not function effectively. So we use whole systems thinking, and I was in the session this morning on the systems thinking, and one of the things that occurred to me, especially in a banking environment, when you're not dealing with engineers, is if you put a systems thinking diagram in front of a bunch of bankers, I've done it, I would not advise it. So I had to come up with something that I could describe in 60 seconds or less. So, and because conceptually I have to understand it, but I also have to relay to them what the concept is. And I use a super, super simplified congruence model. But the thing is, my entry point, when I think about the system, the whole system, is my entry point might be structure. So we need to reorganize our business. So we're going to restructure it and change the organizational structure. But it's not about the boxes and wires, or not about the boxes and wires only. We have to understand the process. We have to understand the systems, the data, and the technology. We have to understand the people aspects. Have we delineated roles, responsibilities, accountabilities, and decision rights? We have to understand the performance measures that we've put in place in order to incentivize the behavior that gets the outcomes that we're after. We have to have some enforcement mechanisms in there, whether you do it as formal governance or you do it as informal linking mechanisms, that allow you to enforce decisions where they're taken as they're taken, so that you don't unpick things and make yourself inefficient. It has to be underpinned by the strategy. We have to have a clear view of where we're going. And it's surrounded by culture. And the culture, culture eats strategy for breakfast, it can undo the whole thing. And then when thinking about Deutsche Bank, we've got a collection of effectively 5 or 6 different businesses, and then 7 functions, all of whom have different cultures, and all of whom are at different levels in their development of where they are on that model of creating a more responsive to change, adaptable to change environment. So you've got all of those things. And the thing I say about the strategy, if you do organization design, someone comes to me and they say, we want to redesign our organization. I say, okay, well, what exactly is it you're trying to achieve? What's your strategy? And they say, well, don't worry about that. My response to them is, you know what? Asking me to design your organization in the absence of a clear enough strategy or a clearly articulated strategy is like asking me for directions in the absence of a destination. It's crazy. So my point is, either I can work with you on defining what the destination is, or go and do it yourself. But before you start organizing something, figure out where you want to go. And it's amazing, more than 50% of the time, the strategy in that way isn't defined well enough. So we're basically saying, we're going to bring you back a little bit. And what this does is it gives us the questions that we can ask to make sure that all the pieces are in place so that we can do that design. And just to sort of describe the methodology, if you think about it, effectively it's high level it's why are we doing this, and what is the data telling us, and how do we know? Then it's high level what are we doing, then it's detailed what are we doing, then it's how are we going to do it, and then it's doing it and continuously improving it. And if you're able to do that and get through cycles of that, then what you start to do, and what I found, is that we start to educate the organization, and it becomes a much more mature way of approaching what are, I see Gervais push his name written over there, but what are effectively dialogic problems. They are wicked problems. There are no simple diagnostic problems. And it goes back to the beginning, which is nobody knows the answer. So if you've got a leader who's comes into a role and says, I'm going to do this, and this, and these are all the things that need to happen, and everybody get behind me, I question that because I'm not sure that you've actually thought that through. But if you're going to do that, my job is to ask the questions to make sure we've thought it through and then to help you be successful. The other thing you see on the bottom here is this driving continuous improvement. So how do we get into these cycles of continuous improvement? How do we think about that? Now, for those of you who have come from any sort of engineering background, this is a very engineering approach to things. And one of the things we try to build in is the front-end loading. So how do you front-end load? And what I mean by that is that at the bank, when I came in, often we talk about the problem space, solution space, sustainability space. We were squarely in the solution space from the word go. We need to find the answer. Okay, well, that means that if you know the sort of front-end loading piece, you're basically starting here, and then you're going slow on the back end because things don't work. Well, if you start here and you do the thinking on the front end, and then you allow yourself to speed up on the back end and get more sustainable outcomes. The elapsed time is the same if you go from point A to, let's say, 18 months out, but what you get is you get that sustainability where you can actually drive improvement and see improvement that lasts for a lot longer if you don't do the front-end loading. So with that, we then said, okay, well, what are all the things that need to be in place in order for us to do that? And in order for us to do that, there are some foundational elements. And the foundational elements, I don't know what it's like in every organization, but what I found when I came into Deutsche Bank was that we were really immature on a lot of the foundational elements that would allow us to use data to organize ourselves effectively. Just as an example, we just went live with an enterprise HR system 3 months ago. So now we have an employee reference data store that spans the entire bank. But between that moment 3 months ago and the moment I joined the bank, the team that was working, the workforce planning and analytics team that was dealing with the people data at the bank, they were continuously improving the people data so that we had the ability to do proper workforce planning. When I started at the bank, the comment I got was, we don't trust our people data. We don't believe it. It's not right. We keep it offline. Within about 18 months, people said, I trust it enough. That's a really important thing in order for us to be effective in organization design. The next one was thinking about doing, you try to do organization design based on people versus based on roles. It's very difficult, and investment bankers are notorious for organizing around people. To the point where there's not even a functional title anywhere. It's like, what does this person do? Well, they do this thing, they do that thing, and then it might change next week, and they talk to this guy, and let's not write it down. We're all adults. We know how we're working. That's crazy. So thinking about a profession and role framework, and then thinking about role-based organization design as opposed to person-based organization design. Again, that's something that's been maturing. And by the way, we are by no means perfect on this. We've come a long way, we still have a long way to go. And then the visualization of organization structures is another one, which is using tools. We talked about org view earlier, which a product which I've come across and I love. We don't use it at the bank. We used Org Plus, which was absolutely fit for purpose. We now no longer use Org Plus. We just basically built a bunch of different data sources that we can use to visualize org structures and use them as we need to. So that's kind of the foundational stuff. And by the way, it has to continue to improve over time. And then we've got your technology enablers. So this is where you start to do the really cool stuff. So relational analytics. Relational analytics. So one of the things that we think about when we talk about innovation, new product development, we know that in order to survive and to continue to compete, we have to innovate and we have to create new products. Now, we've got different parts of the bank that are creating those new products. One of the things we also know, and this is both in our industry and outside of our industry, is that when new products are created, they often have a difficult time translating or transporting those from the R&D center so that they start to take root and deliver revenue into the business. So one of the questions is, how do you build the bridge between that R&D center or the product where it's developed and to get it to start to take root and to actually become part of the core business? And you can use relational analytics to start to identify the types of people that you need in order to build those bridges. And you can do it in a way that you don't actually need to do any surveys. The data exists, it's all there. So you can identify those bridge builders. So if you've got if anybody knows adaptive space, the Michael Arena, so he's the Chief Talent Officer for GM. He did some work at Bank of America previously. He spoke at the US Org Design Conference last year. But one of the things he looks at is that there are 4 different types of people that you need in an organization in order to drive that innovation and build those bridges. You need your brokers, you need your connectors, you need energizers, and then you need challengers, the people who truly disrupt. And there are people that play different roles in allowing those products to take root, but being able to identify them and then figure out how you go about using them in order to make that happen, that's a really interesting thing. We're not that sophisticated on it, but we're playing around with it. The other one is process mining. So we talk about, wherever I can, I think about, let's do process-led organization design, but we don't really have the luxury if we don't have the data of how the processes are working in actuality. So we're using, we've got our processes documented, and now we're using process mining data to identify how people are actually working within those processes, where there is inefficiency, what the algorithmic, the algorithmic best path is for doing any particular process, and then figuring out how to change people's behavior so that they're working more efficiently, which then allows you to take the excess, people who are not working efficiently, make them more efficient, you free up capacity, and then you can deploy them to do other things. So that's where we are. So now at the end. I could talk all day about this kind of stuff. But I guess the point I want to make and sort of bring to a conclusion is that what we end up with is we end up with a structured framework that allows us in my team and anyone we work with to enter into a conversation about a complex set of problems that have an organizational component. So when people ask me what I do, I don't say I do organization design. I say I solve complex problems that have an organizational component to them. And I know that organizational structure or organization design might not be the solution that is needed in order to address the root cause of the problem, but I understand how organizations work. This consistent way of approaching and thinking about how we manage our organization allows us to be a lot more effective. And again, this is not universal. We're 90,000 people, we operate in 60 countries, we've got 150 nationalities, so we definitely haven't reached everyone, but I can tell you we've reached most people, it seems, that I come across have heard about this, which is a really good thing for my team. It's incredibly hard work. It is not easy to succeed. It's complicated, and we're definitely not always successful. So I'm not going to stand here and say, it's perfect, we've done a fantastic job. There are certain things we've done really well, and certain things where we're chipping away. Most weeks, I say that my week is 2 steps up, 1 step back. Some weeks, it's 1 step up, 2 steps back. But the thing I'm building into my team is the resilience to keep going, knowing, having confidence that what we're doing is the right thing to get the outcome for the bank, and to keep chipping away. Thank you.